Welcome to Dr. Sheryl's PodCouch, where we talk about all things mental health. Today, I am so excited that I have Jack Bruskern. He's a high school senior. He's 17 years old, and he's already the founder of Detach. He has a mission to help other teens break free from digital dependency and addiction. He considers the impact that technology addiction has on his generation a social epidemic and wants to save his generation. Jack believes that he can help bridge the gap between parents and kids to develop healthy screen habits together, and he is here today to share his experiences and thoughts with us. Thank you for being here today.
Thanks for having me.
I want to first tell people how we got connected. You sent me an email and said, hey, I wonder if you had a few minutes. I'd like to ask you some questions about your thoughts on digital dependency or just anything screen time. And I responded, I think, pretty quickly to you.
Yes, you did.
And I was like, no, come in, and I want to ask you questions, and I just want to have a conversation.
Yeah,
right?
And I just have to tell you, when you sent me that email, that was the first time someone had really responded to me and invited me on something like this, and so I was overjoyed beyond belief. So thank you for having me.
Of course, I'm thrilled to have you. To me, I definitely do speak about this kind of stuff a lot, but I always want to make sure I'm in touch with what's really going on. So, starting from there, tell me about your story. How did you found Detach, and what does that really mean? And tell us how you came to this.
Yes, of course. So before high school, I wasn't on social media as much. Didn't play a lot of video games, but I definitely played games on app games like Clash of Clans, Clash Royale, things like that. And then transitioning into high school, I was on social media a lot more. Didn't do as much gaming, but Instagram I was on all the time. Quickly got Snapchat too. I was a pretty typical teenager in that sense.
How old were you?
That was freshman into sophomore year.
Okay.
And then in the middle of sophomore year, for my final ceramics project, I created a phone docking station for my family. And I was bringing that home, really proud of it, and I had the idea, whoa, what if this helps us be on our phones a little bit less? And would that work? Would that not work? It was a big idea, though. I was very excited about it. So I started to think about how that would work in my family, and then think about, wait, well, if that did work for us, would that work for other people? And so my journey into beginning thinking about phone use and being on phones so often, that's what really started it.
And so at that point, did you think that either yourself or your siblings or your parents were on the phone too much?
I was definitely conscious around that time that I was on my phone too much. One of my younger sisters did have a phone, and she wasn't as much of a concern for me. I was more thinking about myself. And my parents were on it, of course, but not 24/7. So it was something that we all kind of knew consciously we should probably tone down a little bit, but it wasn't a glaring frustration.
Okay. So you had the epiphany, and then what happened?
And then I spent the next few months trying to figure out if I could build a product, if I could build this ceramics project into something real that I could mass produce. And if it worked, well, would it work for other people? And so I started taking surveys at farmers markets, just asking my friends' parents about it, just saying hey, if there was something like this, what would you want it to be?
So it was like a docking station where you could charge your phone? Okay.
And the idea behind it would be, perhaps there's some sort of app or something that's keeping track of all the time it's charging in there. Okay. And the more time you got, you'd have some reward at the end, whether it was a virtual reward or a parent-programmed reward. Say, if the family racked up a total of 50 hours in a week, that they could go to ice cream at the end of the week or something along those lines.
Oh, yeah, I like this.
And so I pushed that idea along quite a bit. Got in touch with some designers and things of that nature. But then I started to realize that my niche was less so in the product design area, at least for now. It was more just in starting that conversation between kids and parents, and helping kids figure out how to come to better terms with their phones. And so, especially in the last few months, that's what I've been focusing on. Meeting with people and discussing discussing how phones affect kids for the better or for worse, talking to other kids, just with my friends, right?
Right.
And coming to better understand how tools are useful and good, but at what limit are they not good, and how do we balance that? Mm-hmm. But the big problem though is that phones and all these apps, all these platforms on these phones make their money and make their fame off people using them, right? It's not, they don't necessarily have the incentive for you to only use it just enough for your good. It's, they're beginning to program them so that, or they have programmed them very much so that you want to constantly be coming back and constantly checking back. And that's not that's not very helpful for us kids, right? If we're constantly being hooked in by these things, and so it's a bit of a struggle. It's a struggle for me too. I by no means have it figured out, but what I've done most lately is talked about some things I've done that have worked, some things I've learned from other people, from friends, from doctors, coaches.
What do your friends think about this? And what do they think about you being so passionate about this? Because probably some of them are addicted to their phones and always on their phones. So how does that work?
It doesn't come up too often, but a lot of the times they do just kind of give me a funny look like, like, why are you doing this? I know I probably shouldn't be on my phone all the time, but it's not that big of a deal. And even parents are like, well, we called people all the time back in our day. This is just that new version of this. But yes, I see that to an extent. It's new, right? But that doesn't quite justify it. And I've talked to my friends about it and tried to help them see that, but it doesn't always go somewhere. I recently made an account for Detach on Instagram, actually, for some proactive digital well-being things to my friends and other people. And one post I sent out, someone commented like, "This is totally ridiculous. Like, this amendment that's being supported is unconstitutional," and it got tons of likes. And then my comment explaining why I didn't think so or why it was a good thing, didn't get as many. And of course, that's fine. Like, that's going to come with it. But I think. I don't know if it's self-denial, but I think kids aren't always quickly ready to talk about it and think about it as much.
Right. So do you feel alone in this process?
I wouldn't say alone, but as far as my startup Detach, I've done that mostly alone. And I've had a lot of help from people along the way, talking to people, meeting with people. There's some really great writers who've written some incredible books that I've gotten to read, and they have been incredible and inspiring. But as far as what I've been doing, for the most part, I'm doing it alone.
Yeah, I bet. So tell me about this law that they're trying to enact. And so you're going to be teaching me. I don't know about it, and I want to hear about it.
So I recently went to Washington, D.C. For an internship for something else. But while I was there, I got to meet with a senator, or one of the senator policy advisors. And before that, I had heard of some different acts, like the SMART Act by Senator Hawley, and some other funding policy. But when I got to this meeting and began to understand it, he really helped me see that the Senate really won't push too much concrete policy, too much legislation for a health reason, whether it's hurting kids' health or mentally or physically. They won't really do that unless there's some very concrete evidence about it. And so a lot of the bills and things that have been passed have either been warning signs, just saying like, "Hey, Senate, let's start looking at this," or they have been smaller bills just to start doing research. But the big takeaway from that, from the Senate, is that there's not going to be much legislation that's passed in this area for a while, because they have to have some substantial research projects from the NIH or other huge researchers to come to almost definitive proof that it is causing substantial harm. And there's a lot of different aspects to technology in the legislation world, but if we're going to focus on health, it's definitely going to take a while for anything to pass to really help kids grow toward a digital well-being and not just be each kid against every technology company in the world.
So do you think that screen use is like a public health issue, a mental health issue, even a physical health issue?
I do, to an extent. I mean, phones and technology are great for many ways. They help us do many things. And I have a phone, right? It's my solution is not to get rid of it. But I think that it is such a powerful technology, and it draws us in so well and so quickly that it can cause two main problems that I think about. One is being on there or doing things on there too much. That makes it bad in itself, whether it be being on Instagram too much and then worrying that causing too much anxiety or other things like that. Or it could be taking me away from real life, right? Spending that time and not having that time to spend with friends or family or sleeping or doing homework, right? There's a list of things. And so those are the two things that I am most focused on right now, is helping people not spend too much time so that that time they're spending doesn't affect them negatively, but B, they have other time. They can use that time, their free time, to do other things.
Mm-hmm. That balance, you're talking about having that balance.
Yeah.
So what I would add to that is, like you said, right now we don't have a ton of research. And what I say to people is, I'm personally not going to wait for 10 more years for the research to say what's very, very clear right now.
Yes.
Right? So I'm not waiting around for it. So there are, though, sometimes surveys and, 1,500 people, 2,000 people.
Yes.
And what they, I think one of the most notable ones in the last year has been, it does increase anxiety, but it also decreases feelings of self-esteem, increases depression, and even increases suicidal thoughts.
Yeah.
So with the even heavier stuff of depression, suicidal thoughts, can you see that? Do you see that yourself?
I guess I could say yes to an extent. I don't know how great the scope is, and I don't have lots of numbers. I don't think I could compare it as much to 20 years ago. But I do notice that to some extent among my friends. But what I do know is that when I was on Instagram, after being on it for a while, I'd never really feel very good about myself. I'd just scroll and, get that pleasure high of just not having to think about anything, but just going through pictures after pictures, right? No one really ever feels good after that. And I've talked to my friends about that, and that's one thing almost everyone agrees on, right? We all similarly never feel great after being on Instagram, but we are constantly drawn back to it for often no great reason. And I think the anxiety stems from different practices that people do when they're on there. So, by example, let's just use Instagram. So if I'm scrolling through Instagram, I'm looking through all these pictures of other kids doing great things, or just a little snapshot of a moment. It could be a fabricated moment of just this one great looking thing. And I'm over here, I'm just scrolling and not doing much, and I'm saying, oh, they're having fun out there. So I guess there's that element of FOMO, fear of missing out.
Right.
But that also incentivizes people to make their profiles look as best as possible, right? Because it's going to go out to everyone, right? Everyone's going to see it, and they're going to look at you a little bit differently after that, all 500 of your followers, right? And so so for me, when I was posting pictures more often and not being as conscious of it, I'd have to make sure, like, wow, this needs to look as best as I can make it. And then as that begins to accumulate, if we take these tiny little snapshots of the best things ever, and edit that up to just look a little bit better, that doesn't really portray myself real, or in a real, authentic way. And so not only am I seeing other people portraying themselves as slightly better versions or idealized versions of themselves, I begin doing that myself. So that begins to make me feel like, oh, I need to live up to this new person myself. And also I'm competing against all these people who are just insane. They're incredible because it's their idealized personas.
Absolutely. I think we see that reflected in that, this is like a real reports and numbers in terms of how many people have died taking selfies at national parks in insane places.
Yes. Yeah.
Right? This is like a real report that came out this summer that we are seeing this all of a sudden, that park rangers and places like that are posting signs, be careful, like stand here to take a picture, not the edge and then fall off,
Yeah.
And so, yes, people are going to great lengths to show their highlights. And I think that it's interesting that you keep using Instagram as the example, because when they do surveys, they put, they'll compare like Snapchat and Instagram, Facebook, these different social platforms, and Instagram is by far the one that has the worst mental health results. And it is because it's all visual and it's mostly yourself, right?
Yes. Yeah. It's, I've thought about Instagram quite a bit recently. I wrote a blog post on that and how it's affecting us and from my experience. And so I guess that might be why I'm coming back to it. I've been thinking about it a lot lately.
Yeah.
But I agree that it's the selfies over cliff edges type thing is a little scary, because what it says to me is that people are they're sacrificing reality. They're risking what is real and, life. They're risking life for a picture that people will see and think, wow, you're really cool. And that's really not what's most special about humans. It's this like real authentic interaction. And we need to stay with that and not let that go for less authentic, just picture sharing and idealized versions of ourselves.
Right. Do you think it's fair that we call your generation iGen, also Gen Z, but
Yes.
let's say we go with iGen.
Yes.
You only know technology. You do not know life without a smartphone. That's what actually characterizes your generation. You were born into a time where you don't know anything but a smartphone.
Yep.
And so you talk about the need for belonging and connection, right? And intuitively, I think initially you'd think, wow, you have a smartphone. Now you can stay connected with the most important people in your life. So talk to me what you think about smartphone use and whether it really connects human beings.
Yes, this is another very interesting thing for me to think about and talk about. The one thing I think social media does really well is it does quantity very well, right? I can have this many friends and constantly be connecting with more. Just hit friends, right? Or message, right? It's very easy. But one thing it takes away is that quality aspect, that authentic relationship, that real connection, and that's and the problem with that is because some of these technology companies and platforms and apps are programming these platforms in ways to get us to really feel like we're almost to that connection, right? It's programming us to feel pleasurable aspects pleasurable feelings instead of feelings of happiness, which there's a very big difference, even though they often feel the same. Pleasurable feelings of like, oh my gosh, I just got a like, or oh, someone commented, things of that nature. There's never quite enough, right? And they're never real. They're just little dopamine releases in our brain, and while they feel great at the time, they're never enough. We always need more and more and more, and that becomes the focus. Instead of some sort of connection, it's that dopamine release, and so these apps are scary in that way because it always gets us to try to follow it as if that's what will make us happy, right? These deep connections, but really it's very different. And so not just not being that type of connection, it's also taking away from the times that we are able to make those connections, right? Going to the park to play with my friends, throw the football around or whatever it is. Having a phone call. I think phone calls are great. I try to, when I can, I'll try to talk on the phone instead of texting.
Do you actually talk on the phone?
I do.
To friends?
To friends.
Wow.
Not all the time. I definitely text quite a bit too. But especially if I'm trying to catch up with someone I haven't seen in a while, I'll try my best to just talk on the phone, because then I can really connect with their humanity, right? It's not just their edited version of themselves typing or texting that they can go back and edit. but I can hear their voice. I can connect with them on a greater, more authentic level, and really, and not just be limited to the mold of texting or something of that nature.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you think that it's fair to say your generation's characterized as one that doesn't talk on the phone very often, or when they say, like for me in my private practice, when I'm talking to a teen, they'll say, and then I was talking to him and, maybe then he broke up with me. And I really say, like, well, do you mean like real talking or do you mean texting? And they're like, texting.
Yeah.
I mean, they answer me like, duh, right? And so that's the norm. Do you find that to be the norm for your cohort as well? When you say you're talking, you're actually texting, and speaking is more rare.
Yes, that's definitely the norm as far as my experience.
Right, and you're sometimes in circles texting each other.
Yes, that's one thing that really frustrates me. That's one thing that's really fueled me with Detach is being with friends and being with people, or just other peers that I'm trying to get to know better, or whatever it is, right? And then they take out their phone, right? And as I thought about this too, I realized, well, I was also guilty of that before I started thinking about it a lot more, right? I'm definitely still fall into that sometimes, but always having the phone as an easy out, and always being able to talk through that filtered version of yourself, it really, well, it does a lot of things, but one thing it keeps me from growing as a person and like messing up, having a conversation and saying something wrong, or hearing them and learning to listen to them, or connecting them with like who they really are. It takes away from that. And so I really don't know what's going to happen because while the conversations won't go away, it's so much easier to just opt out for something that's easier than a conversation.
So what's your end game with Detach? Where do you want this to go?
One thing, I really don't know. I don't have a master plan, but the overall goal is to help other kids like me come to a digital well-being, a balance between using a phone as a tool, but not so much that it's using you for against your good or the good of others.
And what are some of your ideas to make that happen?
So some things I've done recently that have made it a little bit easier is by reconfiguring my phone to work for me instead of against me. And what I mean by that is taking away the distracting or constantly pulling notification and things on my phone that make me want to use it, so that when I do get out my phone or when I am using it, it's easier to just use it as a tool. And so one thing I've done under that category is I've turned off all the notifications on my phone, and which isn't that hard to do, right? It's not telling myself, okay, I'm only going to spend 30 minutes on Instagram. It's just saying, okay, I'm not going to turn on Instagram, or I'm going to turn off Instagram notifications. And then other things such as putting apps deep in folders. If I know I'm always going to want to be on Instagram, every time my phone's out and I get back to the home screen, instead of putting it right there on my home screen, I'll put it on the second screen back in a folder, so that instead of just clicking on it without really thinking, I have to think, okay, I'm going to get on Instagram, and I have to type it in really quickly. And in that split second, I can go from not thinking about something and just sliding into it, into thinking consciously, making a rational decision. That's what I want to do. And it takes it from a reaction, seeing the Instagram and just hitting it because there's nothing better to do, to an action of, okay, I don't know what to do. What should I do? And that's probably been the biggest thing for me, taking it off the main screen. And so I get to choose, okay, how do I use this time? But I'd say the hardest thing, and maybe one of the best things I've done, is changing my phone to grayscale. And with grayscale, it takes off all the color. It's just black and white.
I've never even heard of this before.
It's not very cool to look at. The first couple days, the phone just looks so meh. It's just there. It's nothing special. But once I got used to it, and then turned it back to color, it was all of a sudden my eyes were, whoa. I was just pulled, like, wow, color. The Instagram logo's very bright, right? Being on Instagram, the colors or the pictures are all very colorful. There's the heart will pop up if I have a friend notification or something like that.
And how do you do that on your phone? Let's say, because mostly parents are going to be listening to this.
Yes.
They're like, how do you do that?
Yes. Well, I'm not totally sure on Android, but on iPhone, you go into settings, and I believe it's under general. I wrote this out on a blog post. I can't quite remember.
Okay, but people can go. Where can they find?
Oh yes.
Where can they find it?
So I wrote a blog post on this, guiding parents and kids through all the steps to reconfigure their phone. It's on my website, which is www.detachnow.com.
Awesome. And I've been reading through some of your blog posts, and I find them very, very interesting. So for the parents that are listening to this right now, you can go on detachnow. Is it .com or .org?
.com.
.com, and get the wisdom from you, which is where I want to be getting it from. I mean, I want to know what I think, what my experience has been, but you hold the wisdom and the inspiration, which is what is inspiring to me, that you want to change things. So anything else you think is like, oh my gosh, you're talking probably mainly to parents. Anything else you think is important? What would be like one more highlight you'd want parents to know about, like teens and digital kind of addiction or just screen time?
Yeah, of course. So there's one thing that really comes to mind for me. I've been thinking a lot lately on how parents can best talk to their kids and work with their kids toward this digital well-being, and help guide them. And the one big thing that seems to be the biggest game changer is really working with your kids and talking to them through the process, bringing it from a dictatorship to doing this thing together, right? And what this includes is not just saying, all right, you can only be on your phone X amount of time, and you can't be on your phone at the dinner table or in bed, right? Instead of just saying that, saying, you know what, like, let's do this together. Let's do a phone contract, say, and you, Johnny, and I, and your dad are gonna sign it, and we're not gonna have our phones at the dinner table, and here's why. Or you could do something where, let's say, you want to have your child not be on the phone for more than 2 hours a day. You could have them, instead of just saying, all right, 2 hours of the day, that's it. You could help them decide, all right, do you want to do 2 hours per day or 14 hours per week? And then that brings them into the decision-making process of, and helps them think like, oh, okay, you know, I get some skin in this. I'm not just being talked down to. I can, I'm part of this, and let's do this together. And that brings it from an emotional, like, you do this, that's it, where they wouldn't think about it as rationally. That brings it more into a rational conversation.
Yeah.
Where they can really talk and work together and be like, all right, let's do this. They can really connect with a why, and understand, like, oh, you know what? It's probably a good idea. Like, let's do this together.
Yeah, I love that. I talk to parents about doing that as well.
Yeah,
but I just realized that, you know, I don't have any kids with phones yet, but I do have a kid who just got a Chromebook for the first time. And I probably should have a contract, right? So the other night at 9 at night, she said, you know, can I, like, I forgot what it was, you know, can I watch some Animal Planet on YouTube in bed? And I was like, no. And then I was like, oh my gosh, I'm glad she asked me.
Yes.
But you're right. I teach this, and I still need this reminder that I need to do it with my own kid, because now that's a Chromebook. It can go wherever she wants, and she's just entering the digital kind of age. And so she's looking for boundaries. And even myself, who talks about this all the time, I don't even have it down the way I should. So thank you.
I think we're all working on it.
This is a work in progress, but thank you. This last couple of minutes have been these real golden nuggets. I love hearing from you. Again, I got the pleasure today of talking with Jack Bruskern, who is the founder of Detach Now, and you can find him and all of his great blog posts and information on detachnow.com. Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks so much for having me.